Hey there, amazing viewers! Welcome to Vuku TV, your go-to destination for all things related to Forza Horizon, Forza Motorsport, and Eventlab. I'm Vuku, and I'm thrilled to have you watch today's tutorial. We have some amazing and informative breakdowns regarding Eventlab, and answering all the questions that were sent to me through Twitter, YouTube, and the Forza.net forums, which include how to create a blueprint, how to edit an existing Eventlab, prop limit differences between Eventlab Island and the main map, prefabs and how they impact your budget, how do you optimize your build budget, which props should you be using and which props should you be avoiding, what are the best methods for placing props with precision, how does the prop percentage work, how do you get crowds and people into your events? And how do you use the environment to your advantage? We will be covering all these questions, best practices, and more in the coming days through more tutorial videos. And by the end of the series, all your questions will be answered and all the secrets will be shared. So make sure you like, subscribe, and comment to ensure your questions are answered in any future videos. As always, important links will be in the description below, as well as a timeline, so that you can skip to your topic of choice. With that being said, let's jump right in and get venturesome with Vuku. How's it going, fellow Eventlab enthusiasts? I'm Vuku, and I am super stoked to be sharing with you and starting a series of videos surrounding Eventlab and tutorials. I've been asked a ton of questions, in which I was like, you know what, there really isn't a great video out there or any kind of guide out there to really help you navigate some of those tricky, waters in Eventlab. So we're going to start with a bunch of questions that were at the beginning of the video. I'm going to answer those systematically, and I'm going to be providing several solutions for addressing some of those questions. We're going to jump right in, and the very first question is the most essential. How do you start, or how do you begin an Eventlab or create a blueprint? It's pretty straightforward. However, there are about 3 different ways that you can accomplish this. The first, which is the one that I use most frequently, is I hit start. I'm going to navigate over to the world map, or if you're going to be doing it in the Rally Adventure, you're going to travel to the Rally Adventure map. Same thing for the Hot Wheels expansion, or even Eventlab Island. So for today's video, it's going to be the world map. I'm going to use Festival Gate Crash as the area, to build my Eventlab. You can use anywhere on this map that you'd like, which is a perfect segue. You have to use an existing circuit or race that's already in the game, or a build stub. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to build or start an Eventlab anywhere on the map, so you have to use one of these locations that are already essentially, already contain a race. You can't use a speed trap. You can't use any drift zones, anything like that. You have to use a race, and that's how you begin. So again, we're going to start with Festival Gate Crash today for my tutorial. We're going to fast travel there. And again, just to reiterate, there's 3 different ways that you can do this. This is the most simple and I think straightforward. You're going to enter the Festival Gate Crash, and if you haven't created a route before, you're going to simply hit A on create a route, or you can go into solo if you have a route that you started. We'll get a little bit more into that, but you can do either or. So again, create route if you've never started anything in this location, or you can go into solo and click create blueprint. It's going to be basically the same thing. You're just going to set up some of your specifications here first, but from there you're going to go into create or choose a route, and then you can do create route. Pick your car, and it's going to load us right in. Now, that's basically option 1. I kind of dabbled into option 2 as well there, but from here, blueprint builder, and then you can just kind of start placing objects as you see fit. I always take off a few of these options, adjust the time of day, and then boom, if I wanted to add things, I can just continue to add them. That's option number 1. Now, I kind of talked about both option number 1 and option number 2. I didn't show you what option number 1 looks like, but option number 1 is basically setting and clicking on your create route, picking your car. You skip the detail screen, and this just takes you straight into the route builder and the blueprint builder. As you can see here, I can click blueprint builder and immediately start placing props. Now, this is option number 3. You can tab on over to your Creative Hub tab, click on Eventlab or My Creative Hub, go into My Events, and if you've played events before, like Lookout Circuit for instance, all I have to do is just hit Start, go to Edit Blueprint. It's going to take me to that secondary screen where I can set the details, and then I can click Create, choose Route, and then from there, just do Create New. And that's going to drop me back in to the same menu. So as you can see, there's 3 different ways of accomplishing this or starting your blueprint. Again, the first is just traveling over to the destination, clicking on the race, and then doing Create New. That's the most simple way of doing this. But I wanted to show you guys what all 3 methods are. All right, everyone, let's review. Method number 1, we're going to select Start, navigate to the world map. We're going to fast travel to our race, click Setup Event, and then select Create Route. Now, method number 2, Start, we're going to navigate to the world map, fast travel to the race. We're going to set up that event, select Solo, Create Blueprint. We have to select our car type, our performance class, and then Create, choose Route, and then Create New. Now, method number 3. We're going to select Start, we're going to navigate to the Creative Hub, Eventlab, My Events, select Blueprint Options, edit the blueprint, Create, choose Route, and then Create New. And there you have it. There's all 3 methods for creating a new blueprint. Alright, so we're going to move on to the second topic, which is how do you edit an existing Eventlab or blueprint? Again, just like the creating a blueprint, there's several different methods that you can use to edit your blueprint. The first one being simply travel over to the circuit, the sprint, or the location that you started your Eventlab. You're going to go ahead and enter the Eventlab, and then from there, click on Solo, and then this is going to bring you to the secondary menu. From here, you're going to tab over to the yellow Eventlab Creations menu. Go ahead and select. And then from there, a list of your event or something that you are working on should appear. From this menu, you can simply hit Start, which is the blueprint options, and then tab on down to Edit Blueprint. And this will allow you to edit that existing Eventlab that you were working on. Another shortcut is, let's say you quit your Eventlab before you could save it. This is a handy way of going back into it. You're going to go into Eventlab, go into My Eventlabs. From there, you're going to see a resume editing option that'll appear. Now, this is handy again if you were working on something and maybe you had to drop it and leave and you didn't have time to properly save out. This is going to bring you back to that particular Eventlab. But if you want to open up something different than what you were last working on, then you're going to want to travel to that event, open it up, and edit it from there. You're not going to want to use the resume editing feature. Now, the third option is just simply tabbing over to your Creative Hub and then jumping into My Creative Hub. You can go into your Blueprint events, and then from there, you can tab over through My Local Events, My Shared Events, or even your history. And then same thing, you're just going to right-click, hit Edit, and you can edit any one of these blueprints. And that's it. That's how you have it. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and pretty easy. All right, let's review. So first, we're going to start, select View the World Map. Then we're going to fast travel to the route. We're going to enter the event, select Solo. We're going to navigate over to the yellow Eventlab Creations tab, then select Blueprint Options, and finally, we're going to edit that blueprint. Second method is when you're going to resume editing, you're going to hit Start, then tab over to the Creative Hub, click My Events, and then the resume editing prompt should display. Now the final method is simple. We're going to hit Start, tab over to the Creative Hub, select My Creative Hub, hit the Blueprint Events, then Start for Blueprint Options, and then finally we'll be able to edit the blueprint. All right, so moving along to our third question, which I think is probably the biggest question. It's the prop budget and as it relates to the main island in Mexico or any of the DLC such as the Rally Adventure or Hot Wheels versus the Eventlab Island. Well, it's been confirmed that in Eventlab Island, your prop budget is greater. There's no doubt about that. But exactly how much? And I've done a few tests, and I will be doing a few tests on a later video going more in depth, but you're going to see about a 15% increase in Eventlab Island as opposed to building on the main Mexico map. And what exactly does that mean, 15%? Well, that can mean maybe a couple more items if you're using, new props. But if you're going to be using the same prop, you're looking at about every 100 pieces, roughly every 1 to 200 pieces equates to about 1 to 2% of your budget. So it's pretty safe to say that if you do the math on that, you could probably see about 1,500 more pieces if you were using, say, a platform and using that in Eventlab Island as opposed to using it in the main Mexico map. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference that you see to your budget. So if you plan on using the environment, like you can see here for the Vuku Imperial Circuit, great to use it on the main island. But if you want a more prop-heavy map, then you're definitely going to want to use the Eventlab Island. And I hope that answers your question. Let's recap. Eventlab Island, the pros, you're going to have a bigger budget for your props. You're going to be able to start anywhere, and all players are going to have access. The downside, well, there's no natural environment, and it's going to require a prop-heavy build to fill that space. The main island, or Mexico, you're going to have natural environments. You're going to have existing roads and paths, and all players are going to have access. The downside, you're going to have to use existing start locations, and you're going to have a smaller budget when compared to the island. And finally, the DLC, Rally Adventure and Hot Wheels, you've got biodomes and existing roads and tracks, but the downside is you must use a build sub or an event. You're going to have a limited player base and non-removable track pieces. All right, guys, so now we're at the halfway point, and we're going to talk a little bit about props, their percentages, what props should you be using, what props should you be avoiding, and just kind of an overall surface level dive. I will make another video that goes even deeper in depth on the props, their percentages, the differences between using those same props in Eventlab Island or using them in the DLC or even the main map of Mexico. But for today's video, we're going to just stick to the main map of Mexico and just kind of skim the surface a bit. So I've already taken the liberty of going through some of the categories here and pulling up just a series of props which I liked. You can see those down below. And we're going to talk about their impact to the budget. So some of the props that you're going to want to avoid, I know a lot of people love to use the grandstand, for instance, because you're making a racetrack. You want to have those stands. I personally don't think it's a great choice because you can kind of make these using smaller props. They don't spawn in crowds or people like some people were hoping. So it's kind of an empty grandstand. So to me, it's not really something that you need in your event lab. And the reason why I say that is look, if we place the prop here, you're going to see that the budget jumps up quite a bit. And it looks like it jumps up to about 7%. Whereas opposed to if we were to use, say, a concrete pillar, we place that item down, and it's only at about 2 to 3%. And you can stack props over and over, so I could duplicate this over and over and over and over again, and it's really going to have no impact to my budget until I spawn about 100 of these. After I spawn about maybe 100, maybe even 200 sometimes, depending on the actual prop, then your budget goes up by about 1%. So this is a great segue into how do you maximize, the prop usage in your event lab? Well, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to want to focus on about 3 things. 1, keeping your build to using only a set of props that you determine beforehand. What do I mean by that? So for instance, let's say I was going to build a brand new event lab and I had 10 or 15 props selected. I could like all of those props and then they'll come over into the liked prop category. And then from there, I'm only going to use these, say, 10 to 15 props in the event. Now I can use those over and over and over again, and it's really not going to have a large impact to the budget. But if I was to then take, say, go a different route where I'm spawning in every single one of these pieces right here, a new piece in every, boom, I'm spawning one of these in. Oh, and then I'm like, oh, I want a shape, I'm going to spawn one of these in. You're going to eat up your budget incredibly fast. So you always want to stick to just a set number of props. For me, I usually go about anywhere from about 15 to maybe 18 props total. And then from there, I duplicate those props over and over again. But I never go higher than that. And that's how I'm able to get these really incredibly immersive environments. And my budget is, maxed out at the end of it. But I have an amazing world. Whereas if you're spending, if you're spawning in 20 to 30 different props, your budget's going to be eaten up. And if you go even higher than that, you're only going to have, 100 props, and your budget's going to be completely used up. So now I want to show you what that looks like in real time using one of the very first maps that I ever created, which was the Tokyo Project circuit. Now, since I made this, a year or two ago, the prop limit has obviously been increased by the devs. So it's going to be a little bit different. It shows 64% right now. At the time, this was closer to, I think, 99%. But anyways, I just want to show you how this impacts the overall budget. So when I say you can take an item and duplicate it over and over again, we're going to go ahead and just duplicate, say for instance, this wall. Notice how we can duplicate this, several times, and there's really no impact to the budget. Now, if I was to spawn in a brand new prop, so let's say something that I hadn't used on this map before, we'll just use a grass platform for instance. Watch how much this jumps the budget up. Right there, boom, 1%. Now, if we take another item that we hadn't spawned in before, like this little box, it's not even very big, boom, it jumps it up another %. So this is why I say select a set number of props, 15, maybe 20 at the very, very most. I would even try to tell you about 12. The magic number is between 12 and 16 props. Stay within that range. You can duplicate those items over and over again, and you're going to get some incredibly immersive environments. And you can flip those objects, you can rotate them, you can do anything you need to do. Now, one thing I touched on earlier that I want to talk a little bit more about are what props should you be using and which props should you really be avoiding. And it's pretty straightforward. You're going to see a common theme in my event labs and a lot of the top creators' event labs. We stick to a very kind of like strict set of rules. Essentially, we usually use the same props over and over. You're going to see a common theme with like the concrete pillars, the concrete walls, the plaster pillars, simple objects like that that you can then rotate and twist and duplicate over and over with very minimal impact to your budget. You're going to want to avoid those very percentage heavy props such as like grandstands, bankments, anything like that that you see a huge jump in your budget. Avoid those items at all cost, and only use them if you absolutely have to and if it's absolutely necessary. All right, let's review the prop tips. We're going to want to focus on 10 to 20 different props for your event lab. Add the chosen props to your like tab for easy access. It's recommended to use simple props such as pillars, walls, and basic shapes. And avoid using percentage heavy props which impact your budget significantly. And also avoid spawning new props once you've established your set props. Now, it's important to note that prop percentages will vary between the DLCs, the main map of Mexico, and Eventlab Island. Also, pre-used props can be duplicated hundreds of times before they impact your budget by about 1 to 2%. Alright guys, so we're going to talk a little bit more about budget mechanics and then dive right into prefabs and how those are impacting the overall budget as well. So the budget mechanics, as you can see right now, I moved my screen over so that you could actually see the prop percentage bar in the top right hand corner there. I'm at 11%. And the way that the game essentially judges your budget is kind of like what I discussed in the earlier segment. The more props that you use, as far as the variation of those props, the higher or the faster your budget percentage is going to increase. So the way to really, again, stretch your budget out is to limit yourself to the amount of props that you're using as far as the variation goes. And so what I mean by that, so if you take a look at my prefab sections, on this map right here, I've got about 2 structures. And between these 2 structures right here are probably right around about 1,100 to 1,200 individual props. Now, I calculate that, and I know that because when I put the prefabs together, you're limited to about 100. And in order to create complex structures, you have to essentially kind of like make Lego-like prefabs that you can then stack together to create one giant prefab. So if you count here, you got 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800. So about 800 pieces to get this structure right here that you see. And then this one right here is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that consists of about 400 pieces. And as you can see, my budget is only at 11%. Now I've transported us back into Tokyo Project Circuit to show you what happens when you add new props outside of that limit that we discussed earlier as far as and how it impacts the budget. So as you can see here, pay attention to the budget bar. So we're at 64%. I add that in, not a huge increase. You can see the bar move slightly. We're going to add in the dirt platform. That jumps it up to 75%. So we went from 64% to 75%. So if we were to go back into my other event and copy and duplicate that one item, 100 times, that would only move 1% on the bar. But in a brand new item, jumps it up, 11%, which is a lot. So when I talk about adding new, so we can continue to duplicate these grass, no problem there. See, look, bar doesn't move slightly. It looks like it goes up to 65 after a few. And this is a very large prop, by the way. This is when I talk about trying to avoid certain props. That's what I'm talking about when they're really percentage heavy. But you can duplicate this prop as many times as we want, and it doesn't really impact the budget. But the moment we start dropping in brand new props, it really starts to impact the budget. See, 66%. So that's how you maximize your budget. And this is essentially how the budget mechanics work, which is why I'm going to tie it back into that first segment. Limit your props to a specific number. Again, 12 to 16 is usually that magic number area. Duplicate those over and over and over, and avoid putting in really prop heavy, percentage heavy props in your event lab. And that's how you'll maximize your budget. That's how the budget mechanics work. Now, let's talk a little bit about prefabs. Now, the prefabs are an awesome tool to use, especially if you're going to be making something really quick. However, if you plan on making something sophisticated, taking time, and you want things to align correctly, you're probably going to skip out on the prefabs option for now. But let me show you just how much prefabs can impact your build. There's a couple things that you want to keep in mind. When you're building your event lab and you've used, say, maybe 12 or 13 props, and you import somebody's prefab, the trick is to try to find a prefab that utilizes the same props that you've already used. So I've downloaded one in advance, and this one right here doesn't really have the same pieces that I had in my event. So watch what happens when I add this to my event. Now I'm just going to place it randomly for now, but watch the budget. So we go from 64 up to 78. Now there's not a lot of pieces in here. This is a pretty simple prop. There's probably, just at a quick glance, I'm going to say you got a road piece, you've got the fence, you've got the horizon sign, the neon, you've got the gate, and then wall. So I'm going to say there's maybe like 6 different props in here with the street lamps, maybe 7. There's not a lot of different props in there, but because none of those are the same props that I've used in my event lab previously, like these, it's going to impact my budget significantly. So prefabs are a great idea. You just have to be careful with what you're importing, how many prefabs you're importing, because it's going to spend your budget rather quickly. I hope that answers your question. And again, we will be diving a little bit deeper into the prefabs and some other topics in later videos. Let's review the budget mechanics. Budget increases faster with every new prop that you import. Duplicating previously used props will use less of your budget than importing new props altogether. You can use more variations of props in Eventlab Island than you can when building in the main map of Mexico. You can typically duplicate about 100 props before you see a 1% increase in your budget, especially if you're using a smaller prop. Remember, prefabs are limited to 100 items, so if you're trying to create a large item that's a several hundred props, you're going to have to combine several prefabs. And prefabs increase your budget faster than if you were to duplicate items in your event lab. If you're going to use prefabs, try to limit the prefabs that you use if they don't contain the same props that are already within your blueprint. Now we're going to talk about precision editing, placement, and the tools that are available to you in Eventlab. So you can see here in my Fractured Echoes event, I've got everything lined up pretty, consistently uniform. You've got, some pretty intricate decor, and everything lines up. And how did I do that? Well, it's pretty simple. One, I used step rotation. I made sure that was on for all of my props. And then I set the degrees. Now, I typically set everything at a 15-degree angle because it allows me to, rotate 15, 30, 45, so forth and so on. So I'm kind of covering all my angles. And for the Forerunner in this event, I was trying to mimic ancient Forerunner structures, and they used a lot of geometric shapes. So I had to make sure that everything lined up in about 15-degree angles. Sometimes even 10 degrees. But this is a very useful tool to ensure that you're getting a consistent layout and turn on any of your props. Another thing you're going to rotate or change is your camera mode. So you can use the orbit cam, which I personally don't use very often. I haven't really found a lot of practical use for it, but you might. And that's if you're spawning an object, you can pretty much rotate all the way around that object in a 360-degree manner. I pretty much just use my camera for that, don't necessarily use the orbit mode. But one of the other useful tools that I do use quite frequently is my camera speed. So if I'm placing an object, and you can actually use, I actually goes fast, so I can travel through my event pretty quickly. Let's say, for instance, and usually when I get to where I need to be, I'll adjust it. We'll use this column, for instance. If I was going to be placing this, so it's a little bit lined off right here, right? So if you're a very anal person, you're like, oh, I got to line this up. You can use your camera speed, and now it's going to rotate and move very, very, very minimally. So that'll allow you to perfectly line things up. And that's how you use the precision tools. Now, I will have another video where I can show you how some best tips and practices for creating geometric shapes. How do you duplicate things to make sure that you're getting a very consistent space out between items? Look for that video, more to come. The last question revolves around live environments, including crowds, animals, and just people in general. And how do you get them into your Eventlab? Well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is all you have to do is just find a place on the main map where you can actually see people already in existence. So for instance, that table behind me, or the people here on top of the building. Then what I'm gonna do, and I'll show you in just a second, when I go into the Eventlab builder, I'm gonna build my Eventlab in this area. Now they're not gonna be visible while I'm actually placing props, but they will appear once you're actually driving through your Eventlab. The bad news is that unfortunately you can't use any props to populate your map with people, such as like the grandstands, and the benches. Unfortunately, people don't spawn on those, so it's just kind of an empty prop that does add, scenery, but it doesn't populate people. So again, the only way to get people in your Eventlab or animals is to build your event, placing props and things around that, and making sure that your route goes through that area, so that way people are in your event, and it makes it feel a little bit more lively. Here we are in the blueprint builder. You can see that the people are gone, but the props, the chairs and things are still there. I was able to add all my buildings around it. And then the moment that I exit the blueprint builder and I actually want to test drive the event, they will appear. So here we are driving through the event. I want to show you that the people and the crowds are actually there. So I'm going to stop, hop into drone and photo mode, and you can see that the people are there. Let's review what we've learned. To enable step rotation, set it to the on status, then you're going to choose your degree of rotation, and the most common settings for Eventlab Masters are 1, 5, 10, 15, and 45 degrees. Now remember, you can utilize the camera speed options to your benefit. I typically use slow for precision editing, medium to navigate, and fast for when I'm trying to get from point to point throughout my Eventlab. For live crowds and animals in your event, Remember, you have to use the main map of Mexico. You have to find a place where there are already people. Then you're going to build your event lab and make sure that your route drives through that location. And keep in mind, while you're placing props, people will not be visible. Same thing with animals. Once you've published your event, those animals and people will appear. And that is how you add live animals and crowds into your event lab. And that wraps up today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful and informative. And keep in mind, I will have more in-depth videos and guides in the coming days and weeks. You can always reach out to me on my socials via Discord, Twitter, or here on YouTube. And don't forget Xbox. You can find me on everything at VUKKUU. That's it, guys. I hope you have a great day. Happy holidays, and I'll see you next time.